As we have talked about the Common Core state standards and the changes that teachers need to make to move toward implementing the standards and preparing for the next generation assessments, we've often talked about how useful the Rigor Relevance framework is in recognizing that there's a lot of similarities between moving toward high rigor, high relevant instruction and the expectations of the new standards and assessments. I thought an even stronger connection can be made when we closely examine the 6 shifts in learning which are described by the authors of the Common Core State Standards. In English Language Arts, there are 6 shifts in learning. The idea is that if teachers can understand these shifts, they can better understand how to modify instruction to prepare their students. While this is simpler, it still could be even easier for teachers if they can embrace the mental model of the Rigor Relevance framework, continue to work toward Quadrant D, and these 6 shifts will take care of themselves in the strategies that teachers select and the work that they have students engaged in. Let me explain this a little bit more carefully. The 6 shifts that are identified in English Language Arts are: 1, to increase the emphasis on nonfiction text, less emphasis on nonfiction; 2, emphasize content area literacy, that literacy is not just confined to the instructional area of English Language Arts, but has important connections to other disciplines as well; that students should be expected to increase text complexity in what they're doing; that students should have more text-based answers, that their work should be drawn from the text that they read, and more of that should be nonfiction or informational text. Shift 5 is a focus on writing their arguments, and this relates to the previous one, but that students should more carefully construct their arguments in logical fashion and draw upon specific references in the text and not just their individual opinions. And the final shift is emphasizing an academic vocabulary in making sure the students acquire and fully understand the terms that are common across all disciplines in moving to higher levels of learning. The Rigor Relevance framework, developed by the International Center, has been used for several years to describe the levels of learning. It takes 2 scales that measure increasing complexity of student work. First, in the area of thinking, and that uses the long-standing Bloom's taxonomy, and the application model, which was created by the International Center to provide a second dimension of increasing student complexity of work. Taking these 2 scales, we divide them simply into high and low and end up with 4 quadrants of learning. Quadrant A is low on the cognition scale and low on the application scale. And Quadrant D is high on both scales. Quadrant B reflects higher degrees of application. Quadrant C reflects higher degrees of knowledge. And some ask about the other forms of the cognitive taxonomy. Because we're simply describing a high and low, you could use Webb's depth of knowledge or more current versions of the knowledge taxonomy to describe levels of learning. So with the framework, we can describe degrees of rigor and relevance, and this becomes a convenient mental model as teachers make decisions about the work that they select for their students, how they facilitate students completing that work, and the kinds of strategies and assessments that they use as part of their teaching and learning within the classroom. Let me explain how this same framework can help you specifically with the 6 shifts required by the Common Core State Standards. The first one is about an increase in nonfiction text. That's simply moving toward relevance. More of those nonfiction texts are drawn from the real world, research studies, scientific explanations, technical materials are excellent nonfiction text for students to use. So as teachers strive for relevance in the student work, many of the texts that they're going to select are going to be more nonfiction in nature. The second shift is about content area literacy. And as you more closely examine the Rigor Relevant framework and moving to the right toward increased relevance, there is a band of interdisciplinary. And this points out the connection between interdisciplinary instruction and relevant instruction. To become relevant, you have to become more interdisciplinary. And if you're interdisciplinary, you are moving toward increased relevance. So efforts to select and work on literacy in the content areas is a great interdisciplinary practice, and it moves you to levels B and D on the Rigor Relevant framework. The third shift is about increasing text complexity, and this is about moving vertical on the Rigor Relevant framework. Increasing from low cognition to high cognition, where students are expected to analyze and synthesize, the text should be more complex, both in the structure and vocabulary, also in the tools that are used in literature, and finally in the match of students' interest, that their interests become more sophisticated and select more complex text as they develop. The fourth shift is a focus on more text-based questions, and this is a direct overlap with moving toward Quadrant D instruction. As students are engaged in work that requires a high degree of rigor and relevance, and more of that's going to be informational or non-fiction text, they are going to be expected to draw information from that material in composing their answers and their work. So it's a natural overlap with high rigor, high relevance instructional activities and student work. The fifth shift is on a focus on writing arguments, and this is connected to the previous one about text-based questions, but it reflects higher level thinking skills that students are expected to do in summarizing information from multiple sources in their own words, still anchored in the information that they read. This also has a connection that we talk about Quadrant D learning being creating real-world products. So rather than just engaging in activities within the classroom, this is an expectation that students will be engaged in debates, such as presenting an argument before a local commission on environmental issues, or interacting with a school board on school policy, or writing letters to the editor. The more we have students do real-world work and composing their arguments, we are developing high rigor, high relevance, and this is exactly what Shift 5 talks about. The sixth shift is about academic vocabulary, and this is a high-level cognitive activity, and certainly students understanding and being able to effectively use vocabulary, but it's also connected with the interdisciplinary literature and getting students to use effectively common academic language across all subjects and moving to higher levels of learning. So this is high rigor and certainly moving into the relevance piece in the band of interdisciplinary. In summary, the 6 shifts give teachers a better understanding of what they need to do differently in order to prepare students for those standards and assessments. But in order to keep all the complex ideas in their mind are difficult for teachers as they're going about their daily facilitating of learning. If they can deeply understand and recognize the mental model of the Rigor Relevant framework and strive to increase teaching and learning in Quadrant D of high rigor, high relevance, they will be naturally taking care of those 6 shifts and preparing students for new standards and new assessments. There are similar connections with the 6 shifts in the mathematics standards, however not exactly the same correlation, and the shifts in mathematics cover several different aspects related to the standards. We can still use the Rigor Relevance framework And the deep understanding of the framework will certainly help prepare teachers in adapting to the shift in the Common Core standards related to mathematics. There are 6 shifts in mathematics. They are focus, which is becoming more focused in the curriculum, coherence, in building connections across grade levels, fluency, in which students are expected to develop a facility with mathematics and not just require very precise completion of problems. Deep understanding is similar to fluency, that students can think mathematically rather than just finding the answer. 5 is application, and students are expected to be able to apply math skills. And dual intensity refers to the combination of both practicing and understanding, and conveying a message to teachers. It is not just sufficient to become well practiced in math operations, but students must have understanding as well, and so that time and instruction needs to be split between both of those areas. Let's look at each of these compared to the Rigor Relevant framework. The first 2 are really prerequisites. These are curriculum decisions that should be made in order to increase rigor and relevance. These are 2 areas that we've talked about for a long time. First, in regards to focus, we use the phrase taking things off the plate. Teachers do not have discretionary additional time in order to move toward Quadrant D learning. They need to become more focused in their standards and emphasize priority standards, and this is consistent with the first shift in mathematics. The second one is another prerequisite, is that there has to be clear scaffolding of skills across grade levels, and the shift makes this point as well. The teachers need to work to make sure that each grade and each course builds upon the mathematics in the previous grade. This obviously is much more important in mathematics than it is in language arts. The third area is fluency, and this is very similar to moving toward Quadrant D, particularly as students elevate in their cognition in math skills. They have to become more fluent in math. What might be multi-step problems for a younger student will quickly become a single operation for an older student that becomes more fluent in math skills. All of this parallels increasing cognition into higher levels of rigor. And at the same time, it is the relevance that creates opportunities for students to become fluent in handling real-world problems. The fourth area is deep understanding, and this again moves toward Quadrant D learning, increasing the rigor, and it is the application of math that creates opportunities for students to demonstrate deep understanding. We frequently say that one of the advantages of moving to Quadrant D learning is that students retain their skills longer rather than losing those skills immediately after a short-term coverage of content. The fifth area is application, and this is moving horizontally in the Rigor Relevant framework into quadrants B and D, increasing the application of mathematics. And then finally, the sixth focus or shift in mathematics is dual intensity. And this is, by another set of terms, moving toward Quadrant D. Dual intensity is increasing the application of mathematics and deepening the understanding when elevating to higher levels of rigor. So the shifts that are talked about in the Common Core state standards in trying to convey a message about how teachers need to modify instruction can be emphasized with explaining the Rigor Relevant framework and teachers thinking mentally how to move toward Quadrant D. In doing so, they can embrace the essence of what's important